So, one of the big parts of economics that we're really going to be, launching into in chapter 12, which we'll probably get to, Thursday of this week, perhaps Tuesday of next week. But it's that diagrammatic representation of, the economy, right? And again, we know that, there's simplifications, right? All models are toy models. And so, every model is going to have, a particular application, right? So we, remember that video that we watched way back at the beginning of the class with Ha-Joon Kim, Economics is for Everyone. I'll post an announcement to it again. But, he talked about how we don't want to just be a hammer, because then we'll see everything as a nail, right? And so we would rather be a Swiss knife, so that we have many tools that we can apply for, many different situations, right? Okay, so let's just jump in. Let's do some problems out of the back of chapter 10 and chapter 11. And then if we need to, we can go back and do a little bit of lecturing. And then we can work on lecture notes for chapter 12, right? Because again, chapter 12 is really where things kind of get, tricky in terms of the diagrammatic representations and stuff. So let's just work through some of these. And so this is chapter 10, correct? All right, so question 4. Question 4, we're asked, why are changes in inventories included as part of investment spending? So why are changes in inventories included as part of investment spending? Anybody want to field that one? Go for it.
Don't you purchase inventory with the idea that you're going to sell it for more than you have the outfit?
Right.
So, like if you get more inventory, you're technically investing more in the product.
Very good. Yes. So anything that's produced by a business, not sold, is something that the business has invested, right? Even if the investment is involuntary, so it's kind of involuntary investment when we have inventories, right? But it's still investment, and you're still going to be able to recoup on that investment, hopefully make money on that investment next year. Right now, there are a lot of things that, will go bad if they're not properly stored or refrigerated, right? And there's even some things like, VCRs, right? Which, while durable, nobody wants them anymore, And so sometimes things just go out of style, the technology upgrades make them obsolete, so on and so forth, right? So the next part of the question, very good. The next part of the question, suppose inventories declined by 1 billion during 2012. How would this affect the size of gross private domestic investment and gross domestic product? So how would this affect the I part of GDP and then just the full GDP in 2012?
So you're selling it off, right? If that is...
So if your inventory is declined by 1 billion, then yes, essentially you started out with a certain amount of inventory. You might have built it up that year, but you used all of it and then some more. And then, yeah. So if they decline, then what would we do to the investment part of GDP? Would it be would we add it to that part? Would we subtract it, or would we not do anything with it? So when we build up inventories, we add it to the I part of GDP, right? So that means that if we draw down on the inventories, right? If the inventories decline, then we're going to subtract it, right? So this gross private domestic investment, that would be a negative entry into that, right? And then also because that's just part of GDP, right? GDP is what? C plus I plus G plus NX. So I is the second part there, the second element that we're adding. And so gross domestic product would decline by $1 billion. And so what would happen if we didn't subtract it, if we just ignored it? Then essentially the $1 billion of goods produced last year would have been counted as produced in this year. And so there would be an overstatement of our production this year.
So is that why? So originally I was thinking GDP would grow because you're selling the things, but because they already existed.
They already counted towards, yes, exactly, right. Questions on that? Okay. All right, so let's see here. 5's too easy. Number 6. Which of the following are included in this year's GDP? The services of a commercial painter in painting a family home. In painting a family home. What do you think, Brock?
I would say no.
It is actually excluded. This is a very difficult one, but no. Yes, so this is excluded. If it's painting the family home, it's not counted. But if it was painting a home, well, even if it was painting a home for, to sell, right? If you were a builder hiring them to paint the home, that'd be an intermediate good, right? So it still wouldn't be counted. It would only really be counted. I'm trying to think. If a business just hired a painter to paint their business, right? Then it would be counted because it's a final service that's provided there. So that's a tricky one. What about an auto dealer's sale of a new car to a non-business customer? So remember, new car is the key term here. Oh, you guys can't really see. So you turn the light off. The new car is the key term here. Non-business, not so much as important. So sale of a new car, is that included or excluded from GDP? Included, right. But if it was a used car, excluded, okay? What about money received by Smith when she sells her biology textbook to a used book buyer? Excluded, secondhand, right? What about publication and sale of a new economics book? New, it's final good sale, right? Included, very good, very good. What about $2 billion increase in business inventories? Included, right? We know that from question 4. What about government purchases of a newly produced aircraft? Included. Very good, very good. Awesome. Okay. This is probably a good one just to review. Number 7, the 4 supply factors of economic growth, right? So what are these? So this is page 270, chapter 10, questions number 7, and we are asked the 4 supply, I can't write today, factors of economic growth. So what is the first supply factor? So these are kind of the bottlenecks, right? Gesundheit. Where, if we don't have these, then we can't produce the stuff for people to even demand, right? So what would be the first thing? Quantity of natural resources. Very good. Natural resources. Even if it's not, diamond pits or, shale gas underneath, I'm sorry. I'm hitting the space bar. It could just be land, right? It could just be, having arable land, or even just, think about New York City, just having some land to be able to work on, right? So what the best extreme example of this is in San Francisco. They were at least, what were they doing? They were renting parking spaces on the street and bringing desks and chairs and working on the street instead of going to the co-working spaces, because you could still get Wi-Fi from places and stuff, right? The co-working spaces can be, $8,000 a month in the city, right? You know what I mean? And so this was a cheaper way. And so it was actually this kind of trend that was happening last year in San Francisco, where these people, because, everything is so expensive there, right? Rent's expensive for housing, rent's expensive for businesses, coffee shops are really crowded, so on and so forth, right? I mean, there's even a lot of coffee shops there that don't have plugs on purpose because they don't want you to stay. So you're limited by the battery capacity of your laptop, right? That happens in Denver as well. So sometimes it's literally just simply space, right? It could also be clean air, right? If we want to talk about China, and their woes and kind of, how I bet over time we can measure the productivity of people that are breathing in smoggy air compared to breathing in clean air. So it's not just the fact that people breathing in clean air live longer, but it's the fact that I'm sure they're less tired, more productive, so on and so forth, right? So that actually segues nicely into the next one. What's our second supply factor, right? So, the U.S. has a lot of natural resources. That's definitely one of the large factors of our economic growth. But what's this other factor? What are we all working on right now? Human capital, education, right? So essentially the quality and quantity of human resources, right? So human capital, is going to limit you. Then we have essentially the stock of capital goods, right? So, we think of capital goods as, factories and machines and stuff like that, right? But it's also roads. It's also, telecom infrastructure, having a fast internet connection, being able to call somebody with your cell phone in the middle of nowhere, right? These are things that we kind of take for granted. But, in developing and emerging countries, they're definitely wanting for that, right? And so oftentimes you have to get a satellite phone or something, right? Which is a very expensive workaround. And then the last one is our level of technology, right? So, interestingly, a lot of the developing and emergency countries in the world kind of skipped the landline phase, right? They just went right to cell phones. And a lot of their internet is through cell phone towers, not necessarily. So it's through, 5G and WiMAX and other kind of technology like that. It's not necessarily through going through Comcast or CenturyLink and getting Wi-Fi at your house. So it's kind of like, Viero, how you can get a wireless modem through Viero out in the country if you don't have any hookups or whatever. It's like that for a lot of Africa, a lot of the developing world. But of course, that internet's slower, it's more expensive. So there's definitely some constraints on them just because of that. What is our demand factor, right? So when we talk about economic growth, we have a supply factor and a demand factor. There's really only one demand factor. Comes from our good friend, John Maynard Keynes. This was one of his biggest revelations after the Great Depression. He was one of the main people that helped the world get out of it because he realized that, there's a certain level of purchases necessary for full employment, right? So it doesn't matter if, you have all the oil in the world, if your people are highly educated, if you've got a bunch of good roads and ports and airports and, other kind of stuff, if you've got great technology connecting everything, it doesn't matter if you pay everybody crap and there's not enough demand for the stuff. So, it's a dance, right? Between balancing, the fact that, we need demand. We need sufficient demand to make this whole thing work. But demand alone can't do anything, right? Want alone is never gonna help you get out of a crisis. So you need these kind of building blocks for the recipe, in terms of cooking. But at the end of the day, what's the point of making all this food if nobody can enjoy it, right? And then if nobody can enjoy it, then that means that there's going to be excess inventory, so GDP is going to go down, and, just because of that, right? We've learned that. But also, excess inventory is going to cause prices to go down. What happens when prices go down? Then wages go down, right? Because the owners of the businesses are now getting less for the good than they were before. And so they can afford to pay you less. And so then you are already not making that much money and already kind of unable to afford a lot of the goods that are being produced in the economy. Now you're getting paid even less. And so then we'll spiral down into a depression from that, right? And that's essentially what happened in 1929 in the Great Depression, right? You guys remember the quote, the greatest fear is fear itself, right? That comes from this time of people not spending money, people freaking out and people hiding. And that's why, I'm sure a lot of you don't remember it, perhaps you weren't even born, but in 2001, before 9/11, we had, a hiccup, we would call it now, right? In terms of a economic, growth flop, right? We call it the dot-com bubble bust or whatever the case may be. And part of why it wasn't so bad, part of it is because, and so we'll talk about this in chapter 12, part of it's because with the advent of technology, with the advent of offshoring all these jobs, we kind of broke through the downward wage inflexibility, for those of you that have read ahead, right? In terms of, you can't pay people less than minimum wage, but if you ship the jobs over to China, you sure as hell can, right? You can pay them $1 a day or something. And so that actually, helped the economy to stay afloat. But what was one of the other things, right? Our president at the time, George W. Bush, got on television and, essentially gave a pep talk to the economy. And he also cut taxes and gave a check to everybody. So he cut taxes in such a way that everybody got a check for like $500 or $1,000, right? And then he told everybody they need to go out and they need to spend. They need to keep spending. And then when 9/11 happened and there was all the fear and everything, right? And markets, he did the same kind of thing, because he knew that there's a certain level of purchases necessary for full employment. If people stop spending, that creates, it catalyzes, it precipitates a crisis in and of itself, regardless of the health of these things. Does that make sense to everybody? So we've seen a lot of history that's kind of, played out this dance between these demand and supply factors for growth. And so just kind of, wrapping this all up into a nice graph, right? That's what we love to do here in economics. We have our production possibilities curve, right? Or production possibilities frontier, whatever you want to say. Different places have it in different ways. And essentially, if we're going to grow the economy, then it's going to be a shift from this PPC1 out to PPC2. So that's the main thing. So this is going to be capital goods. This is consumer goods. It could be really two main categories of goods. Doesn't matter, but it's just saying that with a given level of input, right? With so much natural resources, human capital, and then so much spending on capital goods and consumer goods every period, we're going to have this amount of economic production, this amount of capital goods and consumer goods enjoyment. Why do we need to produce capital goods every year? Can we just take a year off? No, why?
We still need to supply
But why do we need to keep supplying capital goods to places? What happens to their existing capital goods? They break down, they wear out, they become irrelevant, right? You need to update because your competitors have updated and now they're making things a lot cheaper than you, right? Because they've updated to the MT5 2500 and you've only got the MT5 2000, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but essentially, depreciation, eats away at the value of your capital goods every year. And so, typically it's every 7 years that you'll be replacing your capital goods, right? And so how can we relate to this personally? Our laptops, our cell phones, you know what I mean? Like they age out, they get slower relative to the programs and the things that we need them to do. And we end up having to upgrade them, right? That's us spending money on capital goods. So, in a way, we're making a similar type of allocation personally every year. Make sense, everybody? Okay. Let's see. Okay, question 10. Explain why there's such a close relationship between the change in the nation's rate of productivity growth and the changes in its average real hourly wage. So first of all, what are we talking about when we say real average real hourly wage, right? What's that real word signifying or kind of letting us know or informing us? We didn't really cover this because we got off on a awesome and fun tangent last Thursday. But there's two types of economic indicators for, either income or for GDP, right? There's the nominal and there's the real. Okay? What does nominal mean? When you get paid and you look at your paycheck, is that nominal or is that real? That's nominal, exactly. That's a number. That's what you actually get, right? So it's the nominal is what you see on your paycheck. So if you get $12, $15 an hour, it's $15 an hour times however many hours minus whatever taxes, but it's that amount, right? Now, what's the real wage?
Purchasing power.
It's your purchasing power. So it's essentially, you're dividing your wage by how much that wage can get you in terms of stuff, right? So what do? So quick tangent. What do? They go out and they figure out what is this representative basket of goods that a typical American consumer gets, right? You get so much milk, you get so much gas, you get so much bread, you get so much this, you buy so much electricity, you spend so much of your rent on this, right? You know, so they measure all that stuff. And that changes over the years, right? We've all experienced a little bit of that in terms of, you know, rent increases or the price of, you know, food or something like that when we're eating out. It seems to go up a little bit every year, right? So if your wage increases at the same rate that all these prices are increasing, right, then are you actually any better off? No. You're still able to buy 3 loaves of bread a month, 2 jugs of milk, you know, this many Xbox games, this many Steam, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so you even though you're making more, everything costs more. So your real wage is looking at, so if there's a change in your real wage, then that's saying that either my wage increased and the prices stay the same, or my wage increased more than the prices increased, right? Which is more typical since prices increase, what, 1 to 2% every year. And so if you have a real average hourly wage gain, then that means that next year you're making more in terms of what you can buy. So this is always very foreign to us because prices are so stable in the United States, right? You know, and a lot of the things we buy, the prices haven't changed. You know, video games have been $60 forever, right? Deodorant has been $4 to $5 forever. You know, it's like, so a lot of the stuff that we buy, you know, there's not a lot of this price increase, you know, but if we look at the longer term trends, it does happen. It is there. We just don't really observe it. And part of that is also because, you know, every year we are making money. We are making more money, right? You know, and it's not just because we're going to school and we're getting more educated, we're getting more productive. But, you know, once you're out of school, you know, you'll have work reviews and you'll get raises and things like that, you know? And so at the end of the day, you know, we just don't notice it quite as much. Okay, so let's get back to question 10. Why is there such a close relationship between a nation's rate of productivity growth and the changes in its real hourly wage? So we just talked about the changes in the real average hourly wage. Let's talk about the rate of productivity growth. So what is our rate of productivity growth? How do we define that? What's our equation for it? So this always stumps students, but it's one of the simplest things in economics. So how do we measure productivity? Output, yep. So output, our total output, right? Our GDP. Is it all of our input? Our human input, right? So essentially it's going to be our labor, and we use this term in economics a lot, labor hours, or just laborers or whatever, right? So instead of just looking at the laborers, right? Not all laborers work the same amount of hours. Some of us work part-time, some of us work full-time. And so that's why we use labor hours instead. Does that make sense? We also might, you know, so right now this is in dollars and this is in hours, right? So if we wanted to get a productivity measure, so right now this productivity measure is going to be in dollars per hour, right? Which, you know, makes sense, but maybe we want a productivity measure that's, you know, unitless, right? So we would use output, and that again is a GDP, and then we would divide by the labor expense. So then they're both in dollars, and then the productivity, it's like, you know, a unitless measure. So why is our average real wage linked with the productivity? What happens if our output per worker is not increasing?
What did you just say?
What happens if our output per worker is not increasing? Yeah, but what about like kind of what's the macro impact of output per worker not increasing? Not making as many products, very good, for workers to buy, right? So the amount of products for workers to buy doesn't increase either. So the link, and this is a tenuous link. So here, I'll write this down. So if the output per worker is not increasing, then the amount of stuff for workers to buy doesn't increase either. So therefore, real wage changes happen only when productivity also increases. Gesundheit. Questions on that? And what we've seen over time, I'll find a graph for us for beginning class on Thursday. What we've seen over time is productivity has increased a lot and average hourly earnings have not. Real average hourly earnings have not. So there's definitely the potential for real wage increases, but if they don't have to, they don't have to, right? I mean, you know, if you're running this corporation or if you're a stockholder in the corporation just looking for greater dividends or greater return on your investment, why would you pay more if you don't need to? So there's definitely more productivity and more room for higher real wage gains, but we haven't actually seen them. I think we're only starting to see some pressure on wages, some upward pressure on wages recently. The last couple of months, it's been mild pressure. Why do you suppose we're finally seeing some of that upward pressure on wages? What's happening in the labor market? We have a lot of unemployment right now? No, we're actually at record low unemployment as it's currently measured, right? So the unemployment measure U2, right? There's 8 different unemployment measures, so we're gonna look through those because I actually think U6 is the most relevant one myself. I think that we give far too much credence to one of the particular unemployment measures that the Bureau publishes. The news media just kind of fixates on that, but it is a good indicator in terms of what's going on, and it also that informs people in their negotiation, right, in their bargaining power. So if you've been hearing record low unemployment, record low unemployment, record low unemployment, and then you're going to get a new job or somebody's trying to poach you from your existing job to their job, you're more likely to hold out for a higher wage. And if you're hearing record low unemployment, right, as an employer, you're more likely to give somebody, maybe a higher wage than you are authorized to, or that you initially set out to, right? So as a result, that's part of why there's going to be, there are already, and there will continue to be some increases in the average real wage growth. Okay, any other questions? Any problems with chapter 10 kind of conceptually? The problems are a bit nitpicky in terms of, calculating the GDPs and looking at the growth rate and stuff. So a lot of that stuff's just kind of math. If you have issues with that, please come and see me in office hours. Make an extra appointment using the Calendly, and I can take you through any one of these problems, one at a time. If we don't have any questions right now. Oh, okay, cool. So let's get into chapter 11. All right. Chapter 11. So, number one, really easy, right? Two primary phases, expansions, recessions. When it's expansionary, it sounds just like it seems, if an accordion's expanding, then it's getting bigger, right? Real GDP increases, inflation occurs, unemployment falls. When we're in a recession, the opposite happens. Real GDP declines, unemployment increases, and inflation is either mild or it's falling. What did we see with inflation in the Great Recession in 2007 to 2009? We didn't see inflation go down. We didn't see prices decrease, right? But we saw what's called disinflation. So inflation is really annoying because there's deflation and disinflation. Sounds like they're the same thing. They're not. Disinflation is just when the inflation decreases, right? So if the inflation is 2% this year and it's 1% next year, then we had disinflation, okay? If it's -1 this year and it's -1 next year, then we have deflation, okay? So deflation is just, is it negative or not? Disinflation is, did it decrease compared to last year? So we haven't had inflation go below 0, but we did have disinflation. We had inflation dropping below the Federal Reserve's target of 2%. The Federal Reserve has 2 mandates. One of them is to keep inflation around 2%. The other one is to help with full employment, right? So most central banks around the world are just given the mandate to deal with inflation. And the fact that, so price levels can only increase by a certain amount. If they increase by more, we need you guys to go do something. Our Federal Reserve has a dual mandate of both keeping interest rates targeted and also keeping unemployment low enough so that we're around full employment. Does that make sense, everybody? So question number 2, how many recessions has the U.S. experienced since 1950? Nobody's going to know this. 10. The book says 10. So the longest one was the recent one, the Great Recession, which lasted 18 months from 2007 to 2009. The most severe was the 1973 to 1975 recession, when real output dropped 5%. So number 3 is a pretty good question. Why do we give a crap about unemployment? The U.S. has an unemployment compensation program that provides income to people that are out of work, right? So why should we worry? Why should we care about unemployment? What do you think, Lydia? Why should we care about unemployment? We have an unemployment compensation program. So if you're out of work, you get some income, right? So why should we worry about unemployment? So it's not replacing your full income. It's only replacing your basic income, right? And also, a lot of unemployed people don't actually qualify for unemployment benefits, right? So how do you qualify for unemployment benefits? Does anybody know?
I know, for my sister, she works construction and every day late unemployment.
Right. So if you're laid off, if you're fired through no fault of your own, then you get unemployment benefits, right? What if you quit? No unemployment benefits. What if you get fired because you're coming in late all the time? No unemployment benefits. So you only get unemployment benefits essentially like if you're a casualty of the economy or of your particular industry, right? So, when the digital cameras came and Kodak shut all its factories down, those people got unemployment benefits, right? But, you know, if you graduate college and you can't find a job, you don't get unemployment benefits. If you have a part-time job, if you have 3 part-time jobs and you get laid off from them, you don't get unemployment benefits. So there's a lot of holes in the unemployed benefit safety net, right? So what about from an economic point of view, right? What if we take a big step back, look at the forest instead of the individual trees, right? What's one of our supply factors of economic growth that's impacted by unemployment? The human capital, right? So they produce nothing. So from an economic point, these unemployed people are a drag on economic growth. So I finished Man in the High Castle, right? Really great book, small book, but also really great Amazon series. And they call the people that have mental or physical disabilities, they call them useless eaters. And they like brainwash all of the people from a very early age, like report people that are disabled, whatever, to essentially get immediately, murdered and disintegrated and whatever, because they're a drag on society and they don't produce anything. But it's really amazing because that is the libertarian mentality taken to the extreme. And as much as the libertarians have a lot of merits to their arguments, and I do feel like there's a lot of overreach, especially in the federal government. The fundamental, the ideology that backs it was really exhibited clearly when Ron Paul, when he was running for president back in the day. You guys probably don't remember or care, but I'm gonna tell you anyways. They asked him, because he's this libertarian guy. He had a book, End the Fed, that was pretty popular. Started an anti-Federal Reserve campaign that's still somewhat alive and well to these days. But they asked him during these debates, so since you're a libertarian, so what happens right now if you have a life-threatening injury and you go to a hospital in the United States and you don't have insurance and you're poor and you can't pay? What do? They turn you away if it's a private hospital? Yes, absolutely. It's 1974 law, I think, that, you cannot turn anybody away for urgent causes, regardless of their insurance, regardless of how much they can pay, right? And this is anathema. This is completely against the ideology of the libertarians, right? And so they asked this guy Ron Paul, well, would you support repealing that law? So that because they lose these hospitals lose a ton of money on these people, you know what I mean? And they bill them and they try to get them on payment plans, but even then they still lose a bunch of money. And so, from a business perspective, the hospital would love to just refuse them and send them on their way, you know what I mean? And he said, yeah, I would agree with repealing that. And that was one of the huge kind of sticking points, I think, with a lot of people, right? Because it's hard to be that heartless and careless, right? When these are fellow citizens, they're fellow human beings with beating hearts, and sure, they're having a hard time. They don't have, they're not paying for insurance like you are. They don't have a job where you're working for your employer to pay for your insurance or whatever, you know what I mean? But does that necessarily mean that they deserve to die or that they deserve to, what would it be? Sow the crops that reap the crops that they've sown themselves, right? But also, not from a moralistic point of view. Let's think about it from an economic point of view. Why would we want to treat those people?
Just making more jobs.
Well, okay, so there's that, but that's still micro. That's still thinking just in the hospital or the community or something like that, right? But let's think the macro. Let's think the whole forest, right? How productive are dead people? They're zero productive, right? So especially if it's somebody that's young or, somebody, that, is just having a hard time, but they're really, so it's harsh and it's not economically viable, you know what I mean? To just kind of throw out these resources that, can still be rehabilitated, right? There's a lot of people that, recover from poverty, recover from, drugs and alcohol abuse and other kind of stuff, and end up being very productive members of society, right? There's also that argument to be made. Questions on that? So we've got 3 types of unemployment, right? What are the 3 types? Frictional? What's frictional? It's where you're looking, yeah. So when you graduate and you're looking for a job, that's frictional. Or if you are looking, or you quit a job, you saved up enough money because you're a responsible adult, so you've got a nice little, nest egg, and so, you quit your job because you hate it and you're looking for jobs full time, and you're living off your savings or something like that, right? That's all friction. What about the other types? What are the other types? Structural. So what's going on with structural unemployment, right? So that's kind of the Kodak example I gave. In terms of you trained to be a film engineer and you have been working for Kodak for all these years, and all of a sudden nobody buys Kodak film anymore, and so you're structurally unemployed. Your skills are no longer in demand as they once were, right? And so that's the cause of your unemployment. And what's our last one? Cyclical. So what's going on with cyclical? So that's just essentially the economy's in the shitter, the economy's in the dumps, and you're unemployed because of that, right? So 2007, 2008, we had near 10% unemployment. So if you were unemployed then, most likely it was because of cyclical reasons, not necessarily because, you just graduated or you're changing jobs or looking for a better job, or not because your industry is undergoing some hiccups or you are trained for the wrong thing, but just because there's just not enough demand for laborers in general. All right, question 5. What is the consumer price index? How's it determined? Yeah, Chris.
So like the first question 4.
Yeah.
The one that's oh yeah. So if all of them are undesirable,
So essentially frictional is actually desirable because search processes are good, and just, I guess desirable is a strong word, acceptable. You know what I mean? Yeah, acceptable. There's common. We can't do anything about frictional unemployment, right? We can change structural unemployment. We can retrain people. We can, help steer industries so they don't become obsolete or something like that, right? We can deal with cyclical. The government can do different things. We can wait it out if we don't want the government to intervene. And hope that things get better. Because with enough time and mergers and things like that, and the price of everything dropping low enough, then economic activity will kind of start itself up again. That's what some people think. But yeah, we can deal with the other two, but the frictional one is just part of life, part of capitalism. It's just, the only way to get rid of that would be to go towards a model of assigning people jobs, right? Like going to the government and saying I need a job, and they'd be like, okay, you go work there. You know what I mean? So it would fundamentally change, the nature of our labor markets and things like that. Yeah.
Is that what students are? If you're in college and you're not working,
you're not part of the labor force.
If you're in school.
If you're in school, you're like a kid or a grandma or somebody retired. They don't count you as part of the labor force. Very good question. Very good question. Yep.
So even if I have a job now.
Correct, because you're a full-time student. Now me, I'm a part-time student because I'm still finishing on my PhD, so I don't count. So I am in the labor force, So right now, but I'm full-time employed here. But before I was essentially involuntarily part-time, right? I was looking for full-time jobs, couldn't really find anything that fit me really, really well in Denver. I was doing some adjunct work, teaching for DU. I was, online tutoring. I was working for these other, companies doing spreadsheet analysis, financial stuff, but yeah, I was part-time and involuntarily part-time worker. So I would count as, and that actually leads us to, so here we'll come back to number 5 because let's go look at the different unemployment rates. I don't want this. I want the other one. I don't want the chart. I want the data table. Oh. Unemployment rates, U2, U6, U8. Yeah. Perfect. This is what I want. All right. So what is going on here? Let's full screen. Is that good? So we are used to U2. Oh, wait, no, U3, sorry. Total employed, unemployed as a percent of the civilian labor force, right? It says right there, official unemployment rate. And so we see that U2, there's two different measures, right? So there's seasonally adjusted, not seasonally adjusted. Who wants to take a stab at what in the heck that means? They haven't talked about it at all. The book doesn't talk about it. You don't need to know it for your test, but it's relevant to life and the way that we collect data, the way that we deal with data. What's going on? Why would we have seasonal adjusting on stuff?
Well, I know there's like seasonal jobs.
Seasonal jobs, right? So why are there seasonal jobs? Because there's seasonal spending, right? Obviously. So what are the seasons? Holiday season, Christmas and stuff, right? You know, so that's one of the big ones. And then also summertime. You know, people are not in school, they're going on vacations, they're, you know, traveling around, doing summer things, drinking a lot of beer, whatever the case may be, right? So we have to adjust for those seasons in order to, you know, get kind of true measures. Otherwise, some of these unemployment rates, you know, say for August or something like that, I mean, I guess it's not, or July, right, you know, would be higher or lower because there's more economic activity in the summer and the winter months. So we're going to want to look at the seasonally adjusted ones. Those ones are going to give us the more apples to apples rather than if we do non-seasonally adjusted, then we're really trying to compare apples to like Asian pears, which, you know, they're both tasty and they kind of look like apples, but very different fruits. So we want to do apples to apples. And so we're going to use the seasonally adjusted ones so we can see that the unemployment rate, the official unemployment rate, you know, started at 3.8 a few months ago, or last year rather. And, you know, now it's at 3.7, right? It hasn't really moved too much. But let's look at these other rates of unemployment because that is not the end all be all rate. There's actually 3 more rates of unemployment that I believe are more accurate, right? So this U4, this is looking at all the unemployed people plus discouraged workers, right? So what is a discouraged worker? Discouraged workers, it's true, so it's right here. They've given them a job market related reason. So when they call these people and they go, hey, you got a job? And they're like, no. And they're like, well, have you been looking for a job in the last 12 months? And they go, no. And they go, well, why? And they go, because there are no jobs for me, right? And, you know, or something like that, you know, or because I apply everywhere and I never get called back, or because, you know, whatever the reason, right? And so if you're not actively looking for a job in the last 15 weeks, right? What is it? 12? I think it's, we should definitely know this. So how long to look for a job to be a part of unemployed? I think it's 3 months, 12 weeks. Definitely should know this. You can't open a PDF. That's really lame. Open. Okay, so each month, government uses number of people collecting unemployment benefits. They don't use that. Other people think they count every unemployed person every month. But in order to do that, we'd have to contact every home in the country. We only do that every 10 years in the census. Costs way too much, take far too long. And also, you know, think about if a fucking sensor called you every month to be like, are you employed? What's going on? You just start screening their calls. I'm going to take them anymore, right? Yada, yada, yada. So they take a sample. They use 60,000 eligible households, approximately 110,000 individuals. Why is that? Because every household on average is like 2.5 people. So they make it so they select it so it's a representative sample of the entire population. So first, they do some stuff. Each month, 1/4 of the households in the sample are changed, so no households interviewed more than 4 consecutive months. After they're interviewed for 4 consecutive months, they leave the sample for 8 months, and then they're interviewed again for the same 4 months a year later before leaving the sample for good. That's kind of cool. Let's control F. Weeks. Who's counted as unemployed? People classified as unemployed if they do not have a job, have actively looked for work in the prior 4 weeks, and are currently available for work. So what happens if you're laid up, if you got a broken leg or something? Not unemployed. If you're retired, if you're independently wealthy, right? If you made a bunch of money in Bitcoin and you don't have a job, maybe you've been looking for a job. Well, I guess that wouldn't make any sense, right? You wouldn't be available for work and looking for a job at the same time. So, but you need all 3 of these things, right? So actively looking for work means, you know, contacting, you know, friends, family, employers, you know, employment agency, school, submitting resumes, answering job advertisements. Who's going to place a job advertisement these days? This is from like newspapers, right? We used to place job advertisements for yourself, like 20-year-old college student looking. I guess I still see that in Chadron buy and sell on Facebook. You still see that sometimes. So checking, you know, union or professional registers, again, kind of dated. Other means, you know, using the internet, right? All right, so cool. Got that info. So this is counting discouraged workers as a percentage of the civilian labor force plus discouraged workers, right? So I think U4 is better than U3. I think that the discouraged workers should be counted as both unemployed and as, you know, part of the labor force. They want to be part of the labor force. They're just upset because of, you know, job industry related reasons. You know, so I think that it should be included, right? And you know, it's not a terrible increase in the percentage when we include these discouraged workers on both the numerator and the denominator of the unemployment measure, okay? All right, so what about 5? What about 5? This is total unemployed, the discouraged workers, and then all people marginally attached to the labor force, right? So marginally attached to the labor force are those neither working nor looking for work, but indicate they want and are available for a job and have looked for work in some time in the past 12 months, right? So, you know, if you are a stay-at-home parent, you are not marginally attached, right? You're not looking for a job. You're not available for a job. You know, if you're a full-time student, if you're retired, right? But, you know, anybody else that, you know, is participating a little bit, you know, maybe they're a part-time worker and they want a full-time job. Or actually, sorry, that's U6. So these people are more so, you know, maybe parents, or I'm trying to think who else would be marginally attached to the labor force. I mean, this could be, you know, somebody that's a part-time student that, you know, is not currently working, but they would like to, and they're available, and they looked for a job, and, you know, over the summer or something. So, and then the last one, near and dear to my heart, since I was one of these people, employed part-time for economic reasons. You know, so I was available for a full-time work, but I had to settle for part-time schedule, right? So this is the broadest measure of unemployment. And we can see that, you know, if we bring these people in, so who else are these people? Total employed part-time for economic reasons. You all have driven in a car with one of them, I bet. Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, right? All this sharing economy bullcrap, you know, the delivery drivers and stuff, you know, these are all people employed part-time for economic reasons. You think they want to be doing that? You think that that's their number one pick at a career or job, or, you know what I mean? So we're going to see an interesting shift happen because, let me see if I can find this map. Truck driver Job states in USA. I guess it's not the case anymore. Used to be. Market Watch is correcting me. So I guess it's only the most common one here. So I guess this was wrong, but it's still a very, very large proportion of the. Sorry, so here's the map, and here's it over time. And so, you know, look at what we saw. We saw secretary, truck driver, machine operator, miners, secretary, machine operator, right? 1982, 1988, I was born. Recreation attendant, secretary, truck driver, farmer, truck driver. No more mining, truck driver, secretary, truck driver, carpenters. Truck driver, taking over, cashier, cook. Truck driver, farmer alley here, right? Truck driver, computer analyst, right? 2002. Computers, people are learning about the computers. Primary school teacher, truck driver. Look at this, all this truck driver. More. And then here's where we were at 2014. So part of the reason why I bring this up is because, you know, what happened to, so look at what happened to all these machine operators, right? What do they turn into? Truck drivers. Maybe they were factory workers for a quick second there, but then truck drivers, right? And then, I mean, we had a whole nation of truck driving in 2000. And then, you know, computers started to pick up a little bit, and, you know, customer service and retail. I guess this particular, this guy looked at the BLS data. This is just 2013, and he saw that retail sales were actually far more common in these states, and, you know, than truck driver. But still, I don't think that map is overstating the situation tremendously, right? So what happened in 2007 and 2009? A bunch of these people that had, you know, office jobs and middle management or whatever, right? They got laid off, and then they were unemployed for a while. What happens when you're unemployed for a while? Are you still as sharp when you go back to work? No, right? Your skills degrade. You know, work changes. There's new computers or new software to use, or new concepts to learn, or new ways of strategic thinking that you need to employ, right? And you're not with it. So this is called hysteresis. It's a term we borrow from physics. It comes from when you have some metal and you heat some metal up, and then it goes back down to regular temperature. It's not as strong as it was before. Or if you cool it and then you bring it back to the regular temperature, it's not as strong as it was before, right? So we're the metal, and you're heating it up in a expansionary phase, and you're cooling it down in a recession, or whatever the case may be, right? And at the end of the day, we don't end up being as productive when we kind of come out of that stint of unemployment. So what did a lot of those people do? They could not find jobs in their old industries. But you can make up to $300 a day driving on Lyft. Did you know that? All these bullshit ads and stuff like that, right? And you know, yeah, you're making $300 a day, but you have to pay 30% taxes on it, and, you know, the wear and tear on your car, and you got to pay for all the gas and better insurance than you would normally get, you know, so you end up not making a lot of money. But people didn't realize that at the time. They got suckered in. And, you know, you can work your own hours and yada, 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 right? So a lot of these people joined this sharing economy. Well, what's going to happen to the sharing economy? What's going to happen to truck drivers? They're going to be obsolete. We've got self-driving cars. We've got self-driving trucks. We've almost got drones that can deliver shit to your house, right? I mean, what's going to happen? We're gonna experience a massive increase in boomer unemployment, essentially. And it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be reabsorbed into the labor market like they were with the sharing economy, right? Because have you ever tried to teach a boomer how to program or calculus or any kind of new? It's very difficult. Takes a long time. All the studies show that essentially the best use of money is when we're in preschool. That's the best use of money in terms of the return on productivity of a worker is preschool. After that, every year, it's less and less and less of a return. So, this argument that we will just retrain them, I feel like is not, doesn't have a lot of merit. It's not like 150 years ago when the Luddites went bullshit and started to burn down looms and stuff like that because technology was taking away their jobs. But then they were retrained into new, better paying jobs in the factories or whatever the case may be, right? We're reaching, kind of an era of civilization where things are so productive, our machines are so advanced that, I feel like there already is quite a bifurcation, quite a divide between the skilled laborers and the unskilled laborers. It's going to get even more wide. And at a certain point, the unskilled laborers are just not going to really be in demand. It's much cheaper to just have your robot do it. So I always tell my students this, not learning how to program, at least a little bit right now, is like not learning how to read when the Gutenberg press was invented. Like it is the future. It doesn't matter what discipline you're going into, you will be able to enhance your productivity, decrease the amount of time that you spend doing tasks on the computer, right? By learning just a little bit of programming. So if you have any questions where to start, please come to my office hours, send me an email. I've got lots of great resources, websites, yada, yada, yada. Because you don't want to be stuck as a truck driver when all of a sudden nobody's employing truck drivers anymore. The really interesting thing? The future of truck driving, at least in the short term, is not actually completely self-driving trucks, right? Because think about it, getting off a highway into the city and navigating through the city, there's a bunch of bullshit, right? You got to deal with cars cutting you off. And you can't really stop that much because you're in this really heavy truck and, yada, 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 right? So what they're doing and what they will continue to do is essentially the car drives itself when it's on, I-70, I-40, I-25, all those long stretches of highway when it's really, chill. And then as soon as you get into, the city center, it'll switch over to somebody piloting it remotely, right? In the same way that we pilot our drones remotely from, Nevada and stuff. And then that person will take over and will drive the car, into the city and dock it at the depot and then, drive it out of the city and then, let go. And then the computer will take over and he'll, he or she will drive the next truck into the city or whatever, right? But think about it. Like, do you think that the boomer truck drivers of today are going to be doing those jobs? No, it's going to be us. It's going to be people that grew up with Xbox controllers and stuff in their hands, right? Really interesting story of that. The U.S. Navy, they replaced the controls for their periscope with Xbox 360 controllers because the controller was really difficult to use and it was $1 million to buy and they had to train everybody on it, right? And they realized everybody already knows how to use a fucking Xbox controller and they're $30. If it breaks, you just go buy a new one. You know what I mean? So the damn military is already doing it. You bet your bottom that the businesses are going to see the cost savings in that and essentially piggyback off of the existing mechanics that we're already very familiar with, that we do playing video games on the computer, on our consoles. And so, yeah, it'll just be really interesting to see, what happens with that sector, given that sector is such a large chunk of our employment, right? Okay, so if we look at this, we're actually not doing too great, right? We've got 7% unemployment when we look at all of the Uber drivers, all of the Uber Eats people, all of the waiters that have 2 jobs. And, if we look at kind of the broadest scope of unemployment possible, we are, still at 7.2%. Now, what's been going on with this over time? Well, I'm glad that you asked, right? So how do we take a look at this over time? So I specifically want to just look at U6. Let's see if that does me. U6 table has moved. That's what we just looked at. Hold on. Let me just do a Google search here. Yep. U6 over time. Macrotrends.net. Yeah, that's what I want. So U6, U5, right? U6 is we've got involuntary part-time and the marginally attached. U5 is just marginally attached and discouraged. Discouraged is also in here. And then unofficial employment rate is the one at the bottom. So this was that .com thing that I was talking to you guys about, right? Back in 2000. So went up to 9.4 for U6, 5.3 for U2, 6.2 for U5. Then we went into the Great Recession. This was the period where everyone was like, we're never going to experience a recession again. We figured out how to pull all the levers on the economy. The freaking chair of the Federal Reserve came out and was like, we're in the period of great moderation. And then he resigned 6 months later, and then the economy crashed like 2 months later. Yeah. He knew. So then, goes way up to a point where at the peak of it, it was almost 10%. It was 10%. U5 was 11.4, and U6 was 17. I mean, that's approaching Great Depression levels, right? Great Depression, it was like 1 out of every 4 people was unemployed. And then we've got the TARP program. We've got the Obama program of stimulus spending. I actually got a promotion and a wage increase and like a job at the graduate school, and I was working at the IT help desk because of that program. So that was kind of cool. Like I experienced part of that stimulus myself. So unemployment rate went down until where we're at right now, right? So if we look at our official rate, we are at kind of record lows, right? In terms of even the best of the Great Moderation in 2006, we were still in the 4s. Right, even during the .com, right before the .com bubble, we were still in the 4s. Maybe we hit 3 point something, right? But I mean, it's been low and it's stayed low. But this is still high. Now, this has always kind of been around that range, right? If we look at 10 years of it, it's actually really low compared to 10 years. So, sorry, let's look at 20 years, 30 years. So. It's not too bad. I guess it's nearing lows too, right? U6 is getting pretty low, relative to where it's ever been. So, all right, I guess I can't really bitch. Questions on that? I think this is really interesting because nobody really knows about it. Everybody just says, "Oh, the official unemployment rate," and they assume that means that 96 people out of 100 have a full-time job. That's not what's going on. It's also the fact that there's a bunch of people not counted in this, right? There's, students, full-time parents, old people, a lot of different people are not really counted in it, right? But if we want to count more and more people, then we can use U5 and U6. Fascinating, I know. All right. What's going on with the consumer price index? So we already talked about this a bit earlier, right? In terms of the government goes out and they find this basket of goods, right? I think there might be like a visual representation of it. Let's see. CPI, basket of goods visualized. Oh, is this Canada? Dang, it's Canada. Yeah, they do the same thing. They copied us. So, this is kind of cool. So purchase of passenger vehicles, 8%. Leasing, this is private transportation. So this is airfare, buses, stuff like that, right? Just transportation in general. Oh, so this is all subdivision, right? So this is 19.5, and then it's subdivided between private and public. And then in private, we've got purchasing, we've got operating, we've got leasing, and then here, so that's kind of neat. Healthcare and personal care, and then it splits it up. So that's 5%. That makes sense, I just spent $40 at Walmart yesterday, toothpaste and deodorant and multivitamin and this crap and that crap, bath salts. Recreation, education, and reading, right? So, movies and stuff, Netflix, education, spending for college. Alcohol, food, big part, 16%. Shelter, big part, 27%. Household operations, so your gas and everything like that. Your cable bill, childcare, housekeeping, you name it. Furniture, wooden furniture, upholstered furniture, cooking appliance. It gets pretty granular. Same thing over here, right? In terms of fruit juices, 17%. Other oranges, 13, or 0.13. Apples, 0.13. Wow, they really got it. Cookies. I like cookies. All right, enough of that. So that's the basket weights over time, right? How's it determined? They go out and they measure the prices of these things in the basket. What effect on inflation does the purchasing power of the what else do they do when they calculate it, though? They weigh certain things if they're more important, right? So cars, more expensive than bread, but we buy way more bread, right? So they average that kind of stuff out somehow. So why does inflation reduce the purchasing power of the dollar? Say you're on a fixed income. So this happens to a lot of people, right? You end up retiring, you're on a fixed income, you only have so much money per month. Well, what happens if inflation occurs? Can you still buy the same amount of Fiber Plus and other old people foods and Depends? And you can't, right? You got to cut back. You got to reuse your Depends. You got to scrap. That's gross. You don't want to do that. But inflation, it's a bitch. So higher prices with a given number of dollars means every dollar buys less. Okay, we already talked about deflation and disinflation. We can actually segue into the next part. Well, we only got 2 minutes left. So we're going to end with question 6, and we will start off in class with chapter 12, talking about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and we'll link to this discussion of cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. Okay, so cost push inflation. That's definitely the easier one to remember in my mind. So what is cost push inflation? Someone who hasn't talked this class. Who hasn't talked yet? What's cost push inflation? I know, you're doing great, and I appreciate it. Cost push inflation. What does it sound like? Tyler? Jake. So they're trying to increase the prices or whatever, right? But what will happen if you try to increase the prices and say you have a perfectly competitive good? What would happen to your profits? So if you and I sold the exact same thing and you were just like, I'm going to charge 10 cents more. Are you going to make any money? Is anybody going to keep buying from you? Hell no, they're all going to buy from me, right? It's going to be great. So it's not necessarily they're just trying to inflate the products, but the costs are pushing the price of the product up. So, and now we have to really start to think about more of a general sense, right? We're exiting the micro part of the economics class, and we're really entering the macro part where we're looking at the full economy. So it's not so much an individual firm that's trying to kind of manipulate the prices or something, but it's the fact that in the 1970s, so, we talked a bit about the oil and the fact that Saudi Arabia got bombed and their oil production went down and stuff, right? Why does that matter? Because essentially oil has been run by a cartel for 40, 50 years or something like that, right? And in the 70s, that cartel had a stranglehold on the world, and they decreased their production and increased the price of oil for everybody. What did this do? This meant that in order to produce anything, it costs more. Why? Well, it makes sense if we're producing, a little plastic Hercules figurine or something like that, right? Because plastic's made of oil, yada, yada. But what if I'm producing something that has nothing to do with oil? Everything has something to do with oil in our current economy, because oil is used usually to power or produce some of the inputs, or produce the capital goods that you have to buy, or maybe the intermediate products that you're buying to make your final product. Even if all of your production process is completely independent from oil, completely independent from energy produced by oil, how do you get stuff to the stores? You put it on donkeys? No. You put it on trucks, you put it on planes. What do planes use? Oil, right? So at the end of the day, it makes getting stuff to you and getting your stuff out to the market more expensive. So if oil increases in price, everything increases in price. That's cost push inflation. All right, we'll pick up in class on Thursday with demand pull inflation, and we'll work on the graphs. If you have any questions on chapter 10 or 11, please let me know. 12 and 13 are going to keep us busy, so I'm glad that we can move on and work on those for the rest of this week and next week. Have a great week.